Even this is important for you to understand the overall context before we actually jump into the real sessions, right? See, when I say vulnerability management, of course, like what is VAPT, right? Vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, right? So in vulnerability assessment, okay, I'll write it over here. What we do is we assess the vulnerabilities in the client infrastructure, and we will tell them, hey boss, these are all the various vulnerabilities which we have identified, and here is the prioritization of those vulnerabilities that you need to take care, and go ahead and apply the proper patches or mitigations, okay, to reduce the risk, right? So uh, okay, so like the kind of a what kind of a projects we deal with, right? See, the vulnerability, first of all, vulnerability, um, okay, is basically a weakness, right? What is vulnerability? Vulnerability is basically a weakness. It could be anything like a small misconfiguration, or using a default passwords, or unpatched software, or unpatched operating system, right? So all of these things are vulnerabilities, like weaknesses. Okay, potentially those weaknesses can be exploited by the hackers to break into the system, or maybe there'll be some impact. Okay, there'll be some impact if in case if you're not properly taking care about this vulnerabilities, right? Assessment is basically finding them and prioritizing them, and giving the uh, proper vulnerability details to them, with the description, impact, solution, and all, with the severity, right? The kind of a projects that we get it, or you know so we do this vulnerability assessment is for infrastructure, right? When I say infrastructure, it could be uh, like let's assume like you are working for some service based company, right? So in service based company, what happens is there'll be some clients who will be approaching for the vulnerability management or vulnerability assessment services, which means they want us to identify the vulnerabilities in their infrastructure, and they want us to patch those vulnerabilities. Okay, what happens once you identify the vulnerabilities and once you fix them? The risk will be coming down, right? And it is like a proactive approach what we are going to do it, right? I mean, the same vulnerability, let's say if you're not patching it, someone like a bad guy, like a hacker, can identify those vulnerabilities and they can exploit it. So before they identify and exploit it, we have to run the scans, and we have to identify the issues, and we have to fix it, so that next time when the attacker is trying to come, okay, by identifying any vulnerabilities, it is not possible for them, right? So we cover infrastructure, the whole infrastructure, right? Let's say, as I said, you need to first understand the client, uh, network, what are the assets that they are requesting us to cover it as a part of this vulnerability management or vulnerability assessment program. Okay, it could be anything, guys. It could be like workstations, right? Workstations in essence, the laptop, servers, or networking devices like routers, switches, right? Routers, switches, firewalls, load balancers. What else will be having it? Load balancers, proxies, etc. Right? Even the cloud assets as well, right? Which are running in the cloud. Suppose, let's say, the EC2 instances or servers, right? So first you need to, I mean, typically, of course, we will be covering all the assets, which are having an IP address. It could be a cloud asset, or it could be printers or IoT devices as well, right? So all this comes under the infrastructure, guys. Okay, all this comes under the infrastructure, right? The same vulnerability assessment can also be happen for application as well, right? The web application as well. Okay, let's say you are doing a application development, right? And of course, you have, let's say, smoke environment or QA environment, and maybe if you'd like to run some sort of a scans to identify the issues, of course you can go and do the vulnerability assessment scans on it. Okay, basically this is called as a DAST scan. Have you heard this term anytime? DAST is nothing but dynamic application security testing scans. Okay, it's like we use some sort of a tool, and we give that URL of the application, and automatically it's going to send the lot of requests to the server with the injecting various types of payloads into it, and it'll check if the application is vulnerable for any sort of vulnerability, right? So I mean, depending on where you're running these scans, right? So typically it'll leads to that particular vulnerability scan, right? You can also do these vulnerability scans for mobile applications as well, right? And you can also perform these vulnerability scans like for internal network. Okay, we call it as a internal vulnerability assessment. If you're doing it from the external, uh, right? If you're doing it from external, let's say you have some kind of a publicly exposed servers, right? Which is called as basically external vulnerability assessment, right? We have different types of vulnerability assessment requirements coming from the clients. According to that, we do perform the scans, and we help them to identify the issues and fix it before someone exploits it, right? This is a proactive approach, right? So, right, you understood, right, what we do, right? We take the proper requirement where they wanted to perform the vulnerability assessment, and we choose a tool. With that tool, we perform the scans, and we identify the non vulnerabilities, and we'll help them to fix it, right? This is one part. I'm just giving you the overall context, right? And PT, I think I've already told, right? They give you uh, the target to you. Okay, the target could be again anything, guys. It could be an internal system, or it could be an external system server, as I said. Or you can do this penetration testing for application, mobile, internal pen testing, again external pen testing, right? Again same. So here what we do, after identifying a vulnerability, we will try to exploit it like a real hacker with good intention. Okay, you got my point, right? We are penetration testers, right? So we work for the organizations to safeguard or secure their infrastructure by simulating the real world attacks on a controlled manner. Okay, we will be not having any kind of a malicious intent. Okay, which means that today we identified some kind of a vulnerability through which, let's say, I can access the database. So my intention is good intention. Okay, I'm not going to steal or dump any information from the database. After identifying the vulnerability, after maybe getting into the database, I report that, saying that, hey, see, through which I have basically broken into the system and I got the database access. If you are not fixing this, someone again can able to break into it like the same way, and it can lead to a very very serious security issue, right? So we convey like, okay, what we do, we convey like this. So this is the overall context, guys, right? Any questions around this? I mean, of course, the upcoming sessions, right, what we are going to learn, so you will see typically these kind of a topics only, right? Where do we do vulnerability scans? How do we do it? What sort of a tools we do it? Okay, and how do we do pen testing, etc. Right? Clear? Yes, guys, I want to hear from you.
Yeah, we understood.
Okay.
And regarding certification, I mean, is CompTIA enough for us? I mean, can you can we show in resume that we have done CompTIA?
Yeah. So CompTIA, instead of CompTIA, you can which certification in CompTIA?
I mean, for pen testing VAPT job profile.
No, which certification in CompTIA? Security Plus or Pen Test, or there are
I
different
mean,
certifications.
to secure a job as a VAPT professional.
You can take CompTIA or EC Council certifications also has a
Mhm.
good value.
Okay.
Okay. You can also look for those EC Council certifications.
Okay. Is a basic CEH enough initially?
Yeah, that is enough.
Okay, fine.
Okay. um, right. Yeah. So, okay. So VAPT is basically part of, as I said, information security, right? So we may get a designation as a security consultant or information security consultant, right? Which means that securing, okay, securing all the um, data, or I can say information, okay, by using the security best practices from the unauthorized access, right? The main intent, I mean, the main um, motive, or I can say the main the very very important thing, as a security consultant, we should uh, provide these three information security elements, okay, for the organization, right? As a security person, our motive is to provide these three important information security elements. We call this as a CIA, okay, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We can also call this as a information security triangle or a CIA triad, guys. There are a lot of names or synonyms for it, right? So what is this CIA? Okay, what is this CIA? So CIA is basically, as I said, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? So when you're working as a security consultant or a security guy, we should make sure that we are, okay, having these three basic elements. So suppose if I am talking about the confidentiality, what is mean by confidentiality? So confidentiality will ensure that the sensitive information is only accessible by authorized people, right? For an example, uh, so okay, I'll take two examples, right? Not one example. Let's take two examples. You are you're accessing your laptop, or let's say, okay, you're accessing a laptop. You have a lot of sensitive information in it. It could be your emails. Let's say if you're a developer, you have your project related source code access, or some sort of a sensitive uh, details in it, which is your information, right? You are supposed to access it, correct? That is confidential information, right? If someone else is also having an access to it, okay, is it confidential? I mean, of course, no one should have an access to that particular confidential information, right? That is a very, very basic thing, right? What happens if, in case, if your information can be accessed by someone, okay, when I say someone, let's say unauthorized person, there is no confidentiality, right? It can leads to what? Data breaches, sensitive information disclosure, right? Let's say your source code is going to someone else's hands, they can simply clone your application with different name and they can start their own business, right? Isn't it? So confidentiality ensures that the only, okay, sensitive information is accessed by the authorized people, right? Similarly, even if you can take the banking application, okay, so when you take the banking application, right, there are a lot of users in the banking application, right? You're also user, I am also user. Suppose maybe if I can able to access your transactions information, hmm? What happens if I can able to access your transactions? Hmm? There is no confidentiality, right? I'll get to know, uh, you know, all your financial details, right? So what we have to do is we have to make sure that, okay, we have to ensure that the sensitive information is only accessible by the authorized people. That is what the confidentiality is, right? And the second, I hope this is clear, right? I mean, we should not give, we should not allow the unauthorized people to access to the sensitive information like hackers. Only give the access to the authorized people, and you have to make sure that the unauthorized people are not able to access it. Okay, it's like this, right? For an example, you have your employees. Okay, employee one, employee two, employee three. Let's say they were able to access, okay, some kind of a information, right? Sorry. Okay, let's say they are allowed to access this particular information. But how can you identify, let's say there is a malicious guy, attacker, also, let's say, trying to make a request to the same sensitive information? You should deny the request. That's how the confidentiality works, right? Of course, we can implement the authentication, authorization, to make sure that the data is accessible to only authorized people, right? Clear? This is what the confidentiality is all about, right? And what is mean by integrity, right? Integrity, in a sense, you should not allow anyone to, I mean, the third party or the hacker, okay, or unauthorized person to modify the information. Okay, for an example, let's say you are sending some message to me saying that, um, okay, let's say you are sending some message saying that, hey, uh, I am hired for XYZ company, right? You're sending this information to someone, right? Let's say this is sensitive information. You're sending through what? Let's say internet, right? Now, someone like hacker who is sitting in between, Okay, there are attacks, guys. You will learn them practically. Like attacker, what they have done, they also connected to this particular. They just simply uh, intercepted the communication, and they have modified it from the you are hired to you are fired. Okay, now there is no integrity, right? This is what the actual message that I wanted to send it, but someone like an unauthorized person, okay, eavesdropped this entire conversation, and they modified it, intercepted it, and they have modified this data, which means there is no integrity, right? Integrity will ensure that the only authorized people can able to modify the data, right? Making sure that the information remains accurate and unchanged unless the altered by the authorized person. So we should only give the access to the authorized people to modify the information. And if someone like an authorized person is trying to modify some information, we should be able to figure out it, right? For an example, okay, I'll give one practical example to you, right? Uh, so there is let's say I'm going to share some file with you all, okay, um, right? So okay, and the same file you will also, let's say, getting it from your friend. Okay, let's say I have shared one file with you today. Okay, maybe I have just hosted that file somewhere in the server, right? Um, so what happened is, the file now you cannot able to download it. Okay, it just got expired, but the same file is with your friend. Okay, now you asked your friend saying that, hey, I was not there yesterday, could you just share that file to me? He'll be sharing the same file with you, right? But how can you make sure that, right, the file is not modified? Okay, it is not having any kind of a malware in it. Who knows, right? There might be a possibilities that your friend, or let's say your friend system got might be compromised and attacker has added some kind of a malware in it. Okay, now you are downloading it, which means there is no integrity, right? You should have an integrity checks. You got my point, guys? What is mean by integrity? Usually we download the operating systems, or we download the various types of files from the internet, right? Sometimes we download it from the source, the exact website vendor, or sometimes we download it from the third party, the same file. But how can you make sure that it is not having any malware? It is not uh, added or altered. Have you ever uh, thought in this way? Hmm? Yeah, guys. Yeah, guys. Just tell me, whatever you have in your mind, so that I can maybe.
No, no.
Right. Okay. So let's say the emails also, right? The kind of emails that we share. Let's say someone is maybe intercepted that email and maybe added some kind of a content in it. That is also possible, right?
Okay.
So all these things basically part of the integrity checks. Okay, there are a lot of ways to verify the integrity of the files or integrity of the messages. So one of the way to verify the integrity of the files is basically with the checksum value. For an example, let's say I am uh, downloading an operating system from the this I'm downloading this operating system from this particular place, right? You'll have a checksum value. The same operating system, let's say if you're getting it from your friend, you need to compare with this checksum value. If it is same, which means that there is no modification has done. If it is different, which means there is some modifications. Who knows? There might be some kind of a malware in it, right? So this is integrity and availability, right? We have to make sure that whatever the data, okay, is there, that should be accessible to all of them 24 into 7 whenever they want it to access. That's what the availability is basically, right? So let's say uh, there is a website, okay, which always goes down, right? Which means there is no availability. So if the website always, if you feel it is down, you will have the different. I mean, there is availability issue, right? What happens? Users might not be interested to, um, purchase or do any kind of uh, what activities, right? And it is, of course, impacting to the business, right? So and data also, right? When I say data, whatever the data is there, okay, you are allowed to access that. Let's say if your bank balance or if your bank amount, right, it is accessible to you whenever you want to access 24 into 7 using the internet banking, right? That is what the availability is basically, right? So as a security person, we have to make sure that, okay, we have to provide the confidentiality, okay, which means that giving the access to the data or a systems or a network to only authorized people, and we should make sure that we are having some kind of a security policies implemented to stop the unauthorized access. And integrity, we have to make sure that the data is accurate and unchanged or altered unless the authorized persons are doing it. Okay, this is something we do it again with the help of the encryptions and hashing, right? And availability, we have to make sure that the resources are available whenever the intended people or the authorized people wanted to access it, right? These all the three, you know the very very important information security elements, guys. In most of the interviews also, they will ask you, right? And throughout this course, we are also going to calculate the impact of various types of attacks, okay, with this confidentiality and integrity and availability, right? So it is important, guys. Hope this is clear to you. This, I have taken the time to explain this, right? Because this is important. Clear? Are you guys are clear with these three terminologies? What is confidentiality, integrity, and availability? So as an attacker, right? So are you guys are clear with this?
Yeah, sir.
Okay. So as an attacker, even when you guys are performing any kind of a attack, right? We will also see, okay, if you can able to access any confidential information, if you can able to modify something, okay, or if you can able to delete something. Okay, depending on this, we can also calculate the impact, okay, the real impact of the specific attack, and we highlight it to the respective owner, right? Yeah. So yeah, and let's also discuss about the fundamental terminologies, guys, right? So some of the terminologies, like last time I have used a term called risk, right? You might be not aware of the risk, right? And okay, we were using something like threats, vulnerabilities, and all assets and all. So let's start this course with the very very basic, right? Let's first understand the basic terminologies, okay? If someone is very, I know that like you guys are freshers, and someone is joining from the other domain to the uh, other domain to the information security. So let's learn this course from the very very basic, as I said, okay, by understanding the terminologies. You guys can also take your own notes, guys. Make sure that it's good, I mean, it's good to have your own notes, okay, so to track what we are covering and what you're discussing. So let's start with assets, right? Assets, in the easiest way, if I want to explain this asset, right? Asset is something which has some kind of a value in it, okay? uh, like like again, data, device, or other components of the environment that supports the information related activities. It could be database, server, network devices, Even employee is also one of the asset for an organization, right? Asset is what? Asset is basically uh, a component which has some kind of a worth in it, right? Applications, network, servers, database, right? Programs. All these are basically the assets, right? Yeah. And let's take an asset of a server. Okay. Let's take an asset of a web server. So when I say web server, of course, it is going to serve the web pages to all the users who are trying to access it, right? So you are running a web server. It has some kind of a website in it, right? So there could be, you know, different types of threats for that web server, which can harm that server, right? Let's say you have a web server. Let's say someone is performing a denial of a service attack. When I say denial of a service attack, it's like someone is sending a lot of traffic to it, okay, to bring down that service, which is basically a threat, right? A potential cause of an unwanted incident which may result in the harm to a system, right? So if I am doing a denial of a service attack, right, the reason why I'm doing denial of a service, I want to bring down that particular server, right? That is what the, okay, harm that I wanted to do it to the server, right? That is a potential incident, right? And there are a lot of threats, guys. Okay, let's say if the same system maybe infect, let's say, who knows it, right? It might infect with malware, right? Let's say the same server is having an email access, you know, through email. Let's say he got some kind of a phishing link and he clicked on it. I mean, these are all the various types of threats, right? And some of the threats can be a natural disasters also, right? So maybe let's say in um, maybe let's say unskilled employee who is accessing the server, let's say, that is also a threat. Who knows it? He might delete something. He might modify certain configurations in the server, which might open doors to hackers, right? What? So threat is basically what? Threat is basically a potential cause of an unwanted incident which may result in harm to a system, right? So simply when I say threat, right, you can uh, remember like an attackers, right? So they can attack, they can do some kind of a damage, right? So I mean, I'm just giving you one example, right? Let's say you have some asset server. It might have a lot of different types of threats, right? Yeah. So what is vulnerability? So vulnerability is a weakness, okay, in a system or a software or hardware that can be exploited by the threat, right? When I say threat, let's say attacker, right? So a asset, a server has a loophole that can be, okay, a server is basically asset. It has a loophole which is basically vulnerability that can be exploited by the threat, right? You got my point. So you have a server, right? You have a server. You have a server, right? This is what? An asset, right? So here is an attacker, right? So he's always trying to, perform some kind of a damage, right? Potential harm to the server. If there is any vulnerability, of course he can able to exploit it, right? He is a threat exploiting this vulnerability on the asset. Understand? Clear? Okay, if he exploits it, when I say exploit again, guys, taking the advantage of the vulnerability is basically exploiting, right? When you say vulnerability, there is a weakness. Okay, let's say unpatched software or a weak password. So he will, try to break it using some technique or a script, right? That's what the exploit is, right? And once you get into this system, after doing an exploitation, right? What he has done? Now there was an issue. Okay, someone has basically exploited that issue, and they were able to, let's say, access database, right? That is the risk, right? The potential, okay, the potential for loss or a damage when a threat exploits a vulnerability. Right? What is the risk now? If there is any loophole, someone may exploit the loophole, okay, which is like exploiting the vulnerability to get into the system, and depending on what sort of information that they get it is what the risk is, right? Usually we can also call this risk, you know uh, risk equal to vulnerability into threat, right? When there is a vulnerability, when the threat actor is basically taking the advantage of that vulnerability, there will be some risk, right? It can lead to some kind of a potential loss or a damage, right? Suppose today, uh, I got an access to the database. Of course, that can lead to data breach. That's what the risk is, right? Clear? Yeah, guys. Are you clear with these three terminologies? Any confusion?
No, sir, clear.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that is what the risk, right? Now, attack vector. So, attack vector is basically a path, which he used to break into the system. Okay, like it could be a vulnerability which is exploiting through network. So, the attack vector is network. Okay, he's trying to propagate some kind of a malware using a phishing email. So, the attack vector is an email, right? Maybe he's doing some kind of a physical attack by visiting the office location. That is what the physical, okay, the attack vector is physical, right? Yeah, the attack vector is basically a method or a path used by an attacker to access or penetrate the system. An incident, it's basically event that compromises the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information, right? Of course, data breach is an incident, right? Um, Maybe attacking is also an incident. Threat when he's trying to attack, right? That is basically an incident, right? Maybe sending some kind of a malware is also an incident, right? So yeah, when I say incident, it's basically an event that compromises the integrity, confidentiality, availability, right? When someone is trying to access something which is not accessible, or when someone is trying to modify something which is not supposed to modify, or delete something which is not supposed to delete, right? All of these are basically considered as a incidents, right? Yeah. And of course, mitigation is basically a measure taken to reduce the impact or likelihood of a threat exploiting a vulnerability, right? So there was a loophole, right, that can be exploited. So there will be some solution, right, to fix it. So the fix that we are talking about is basically a mitigation. Okay, so let's say some software, some version has issue. Okay, maybe let's say some software, let's say 2.3 has a issue, right? Like vulnerability. So they are fixing it in the next version, let's say 2.2.4. I mean, we need to apply this patch, right? Which is the latest patch where there was a fix for that vulnerability. That is what the mitigation is, right? Applying the, or it could be any kind of a, again, security policy also, right? Or some kind of a code changes also, right? That is what it's basically a measure, taken to reduce the impact of the uh, threat exploiting a vulnerability, right? And when I, so we are talking a lot about the vulnerabilities, right? We are talking a lot about the vulnerabilities. As I said, there are different types of vulnerabilities that we have. Okay, it could be a misconfiguration, or it could be some kind of unpatched systems, or it could be privilege escalation vulnerability. There are different categories. I can show you that. So these vulnerabilities, always, every there are a lot of vulnerabilities, right? How do we track these vulnerabilities? Anyone knows it? How do we track the vulnerabilities? Hmm? So every vulnerability, right, will have something called as a CVE number. Okay, every vulnerability will have what? CVE ID, which is unique for every vulnerability. Okay, so these vulnerabilities can be tracked, okay, or maintained in a repository. Like I have opened two vulnerability databases. One is called as NVD, okay, National Vulnerability Database, which is maintained by the NIST and US government. Okay, and we also have CV details. Okay, this is from the security scorecard. Okay, so suppose you can see this is CVS score. Okay, this is the severity of the specific vulnerability. Not all the vulnerabilities are very critical, right? Through which we can break into the system. As I said, there are different categories of vulnerabilities we have. Okay, some, so not, I mean, that is completely depending on the impact of a vulnerability. We have a CVS score, right? So first of all, I'll show you how the CVE number will look like, right? So suppose if I am opening certain vulnerabilities, right, you can say this is the CVE number. What is mean by CVE? Common vulnerability exposure. Okay, what is mean by CVE? Where is that? Okay, here it is. CVE, common vulnerability exposure, a list of publicly disclosed information security vulnerabilities and exposures, right? So every vulnerability will have a unique CVE ID, which is assigned by the number authorities. There are a lot of number authorities are there, right? So suppose, let's say today you are a security researcher. Okay, you have identified a issue, you report it to the vendor will confirm that, okay, this is a true positive issue, and they give a CV number for it, and this is unique. And if I copy this CV number, right, and if I Google it, I'll get the same details about the vulnerability from various sources, right? What is that vulnerability that I was searching about? This is related to OAuth related issue. Okay, so suppose if I click on it, it'll give you all the details. This is the latest one. So this is the CVE, and this is the year when it is identified. So it's a 2025. Recently, it is identified. I think within the 7 days only, we have identified this. You know, this is reported, and this is a unique ID 22376, and this is related to innet OAuth client in the net OAuth package before 2.9 for Perl. Okay, the default nouns is 32-bit integer generated from the built-in random function, which is not cryptographically strong. I think this is related to a cryptographic issue on the OAuth. Okay, open authentication. Um, this is one of the authentication protocol, right? And if I have googled it, right? I have googled it, I got the results from the various sources. You can see in all the places I'll get the same result. You can see I got the results from the vulndb. Okay, so in vulndb also I can see the same result. Okay, you will have the same description, you will have the same version where it got affected, like 0.29 for Perl. Okay, I think here we need to log in, guys, to read the information. That is fine. But here you can see you have somewhere some results from the GitHub. Okay, so you can see this is the same one, right? And here you have results from NVD, right? National Vulnerability Database. It is same. It just reported 4 days back. You can see, right? Understand what a CVE stands for, guys? Hmm? What is the CVE stands for?
Common vulnerabilities and exposures.
Yes, right. Which is unique for every vulnerability. Suppose if you have hundreds of vulnerabilities, right? How do you track those vulnerabilities, guys? With the help of the CVs, we can track it, right? Suppose if I am showing you, let's say, some sample report, right? Let's say you have done the vulnerability scan on your infrastructure, you have identified hundreds of vulnerabilities, right? And every vulnerability will have what? A CVE number. You can see here. See, CVE. These are very old one, 1999. Okay, some of them are 2010, 2004, right? You can see. This is how 2016. And this is how we can see the vulnerabilities, guys, in the reports. And also, every vulnerability will also have something called as a CVSS score. This one, CVSS score, which is basically a risk. Sorry, which is basically a severity. Okay, like as I said, not every vulnerability can be exploited, right? So depending on the severity, the impact will be different, right? And the impact is always calculated with the CVSS score. And here we have the CVSS score ranking, right? You can also search CVSS. So basically, CVSS stands for Common Vulnerability Scoring System. Okay, so let's say CVSS score. If I'm talking right, so this is how the CVSS score uh, will be, right? If any vulnerability is scoring in between 0.1 to 3.9 is considered as a low, right? So here, right, 1 to, I can say, 3, all of these are low issues. That's the reason it is like in the green, right? So 3.9, so typically here, right? Yeah, then yellow, right? So 4 to 6.9 is medium, and 7 to 8.9 is high, 9 to 10 is critical. Okay, 9 to 10, okay, all of these are critical issues. Okay, it will have a high impact, and these are medium and these are low, right? What is CVS score? CVS score is basically what? Severity. Okay, it will give you a severity of the vulnerability, the one which we looked at, right, last time. So what is the CVS score? Here they haven't given the CVS score yet. Okay, okay, let me quickly check. So always the CVS score is calculated depending on the impact, right? Okay, this is the issue. Okay, here you can see the CVS score. The base score is 9.8. Why 9.8? You can see here, if someone exploits this issue, right, they can read, okay, the confidential information, they can modify the confidential information, and they can also delete the information, which means like this three parts, right? Which is confidentiality is high, integrity is high, availability is also high. attacker, after exploiting this vulnerability, they can read, delete, modify all the information. Okay, so confidentiality, integrity, availability is high. That's the reason the base score of this particular issue is 9.8. Okay, you will learn that further in the upcoming further sessions, guys. How do we calculate this? What is it and all? Even in the vulnerability reports, also you will see like this. Okay, 7.5, 2.6, right? 5, right? So it's all depending on the uh, CVS score calculation. Okay, nice, right? So yeah. Is it clear, guys? Till now, whatever we have covered. So today, I just gave the context of what we are going to look. Okay, what we are going to learn it and how we'll get the VAPT related requirements and what is information security. What is the CIA triad, like confidentiality, integrity, and availability with examples. Then the fundamental terminologies. Right. Hope these topics, whatever we have covered today, is clear to you, right? So in upcoming sessions, I'll help you to set up the lab. We'll go through the networking basics, Kali Linux basics. Then we'll start with the penetration testing methodology, and then we'll apply this penetration testing methodology on the network, okay, an application, and we will learn how to perform the vulnerability assessment on the infrastructure and application, right?